Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. You know, one of those issues that I talk about so frequently is the common accepted wisdom of the day, and that is diversity is our strength. We're told on every hand, whether it be Joe Biden or his staff, or people at the university level, or people in the public schools, churches, and everyone tells us diversity is our strength, but they really never get down and define what they mean by diversity. An article that I'm looking at now in Psychology Today, written actually last year by the author's name is Reid, a doctor, tells us that diversity is our strength. And the name of the article is Why Diversity is Really Our Greatest Strength. But I want to look at a couple of things pertaining to it because she falls right into the same trap that I've been talking about, where people talk about diversity and following the mantra, diversity is our strength. Because what actually takes place is she never really defines what kind of diversity she has in mind. And it's easy when people don't define the proposition and define what they're talking about to switch back and forth and to confuse the reader, confuse the audience as to what exactly you're talking about. So just let me give you an illustration here. She writes in the article, for example, that diversity means people have various life experiences, which of course I would agree with. That means simply that there is in a multiplicity of counselors, or two heads are better than one. In a multiplicity of counselors, there is wisdom. That's simply what the Bible teaches. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, where no counsel or policy givers, the people fail, but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And so various life experiences simply means that there is more than one person. But that's not what they really mean, is it? No, that's the common wisdom is when they say diversity, they mean something else. She switches very quickly to diverse races, cultures, and genders, for example. And so multiplicity of experiences, of life's experiences, that's one thing. But then you turn around and talk about, well, diverse races, cultures, and genders, and all that. So they just switch back and forth and they don't define what kind of diversity they're talking about. So Reid tells us in this article, well, we want to have more democratic institutions. We want to be more democratic in our country. Everyone agrees with that. No one disagrees that that is the case because she's talking about everyone participating. She makes this comment, diverse nations tend to be more democratic because all members have a vote, all members have a voice, all members have choice. And this creates both individual and collective accountability. We might have to come back to that one, not exactly knowing what she meant by collective accountability. But we all have a mutual stake, she continues, in the nation's successes and failures. So for most of that, we agree. That is, more democratic, more people involved, everybody different thinking, and multiplicity of counselors, so to speak. But then she gives us a lecture on equity, and that's where they come in. They just talk about diversity and diverse peoples, and now all of a sudden we're into equity. And the lecture on equity, what exactly is equity? Equity refers to groups, different groups being represented. So we're not talking about simply different life experiences with different people, that is, two heads are better than one. No, we're talking about equity, different groups being represented. So it's not about individuals at all, but groups. That's what they mean by diversity. As a matter of fact, one website, McKinsey & Company, which is mckinsey.com, gives us this definition of diversity and specifically equity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are three closely linked values held by many organizations that are working to be supportive of different groups and individuals, including people of different races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, sexual orientations. So what they are talking about, of course, is not simply two heads are better than one, two people thinking better than one person thinking. Not talking about a multiplicity of counselors or a staff of counselors. When they talk about diversity, they're talking about racial, ethnic, gender type of diversity. That actually is, of course, a Marxist worldview that divides people up into groups. We want different groups represented. But underlying that is a complete Marxist worldview. It is an assumption that everyone is separated by class. So let's just back up for a moment and think about that. The classic Marxist worldview is that society was divided up between the bourgeois, that is the landowners, the property owners, the factory owners, and the proletariat, that is the workers, that is the person on the bottom, the worker bees. And so the bourgeoisie were taking advantage of the proletariat. And so Marxists wanted class warfare. Now, neo-Marxism, basically the same thing, except now we're not dividing up into property owners and those that are working, or dividing up into factory owners and factory workers. We're dividing up the country into classes of race, gender, and sexuality. And that's exactly what she does in this particular article. So the neo-Marxist worldview is exactly what she puts it in this article. As such, diversity, she says, quoting directly, can offer the chance for the most members to have equal access to resources. It's not one person or one group ruling the nation. Now, what has she done here? She talks about one group ruling the nation. She's talking about, of course, the idea of whites versus blacks, Hispanics versus blacks, women versus men, all of that kind of thing. The assumption upon which she bases all of her argumentation is that whites are ruling, they're the primary group, and we need to have people from diverse minorities in leadership positions. That's basically what she's saying. So she's taken the Marxist worldview and she's speaking about how we need to have diversity. So you see the switcheroo, the old switcheroo that they do, that is not simply multiplicity of counselors, but simply we need now more diverse cultures, races, genders, and so forth. Now, I want you to think about how in public schools, as well as in the public forum, for example, the Constitution is continually criticized by individuals on the same grounds. I have a good friend who went to Constitution Hall in Philadelphia one year. And at Constitution Hall, he happened to kind of tag along a school group that was being led by one of the workers there at Constitution Hall. And they took the school group to the picture of all the founding fathers signing the Constitution. And the lecturer, the tour guide that was the state managed man, he said, he's told the school children, they're about second or third grade, he told them, well, look, he said, what do you all notice about the picture? Some of the kids would say, well, they're wearing funny hats, or they have funny wigs, or they had high collars, and look at their shoes. And he said, no. What you see is they're all white men. Let's go to the next exhibit. Now, what was he trying to do? He's attacking the Constitution, attacking the Declaration of Independence on the basis that, well, they're all white men. So the point is that a multiplicity of individuals, a group of counselors, is not what they mean by diversity. They think that if it's all white men, there's something got to be definitely wrong with the document that they produced. Isn't it interesting that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, are the greatest uninspired documents that human minds have ever produced, giving us the greatest freedoms that the world has ever produced outside of the Bible? But that's exactly what they have in mind. That's an illustration of what they mean by diversity. Well, we'll look at a couple of other things when we come back after this break. We're going to talk about the Bible for a moment, the greatest document ever composed, and we're going to apply this diversity, or the diverse concept, to the composers of the Bible. Back in a moment. Have you ever wondered why it is, as we pointed out in the last segment, that people who defend that view and people who go around chirping that mantra never really explain what they mean by diversity? What kind of diversity do they have in mind? Well, they speak about diversity as if it is simply a multiplicity of counselors, people, more heads, two heads are better than one, many people thinking a certain, putting their heads together, coming up with programs and ideas and concepts. And then they just shift on you to this class warfare thing, such as bourgeois versus proletariat, or that is the white majority versus minorities versus homosexuality, different genders. And so that's exactly what, as I mentioned regarding Constitution Hall, one of the guides there told school groups, and I suppose it was done on a regular basis. The only thing you notice, children, is that these all are white men. And so the whole point is that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, they are less than par documents because, after all, they did not have an inclusive and diverse group that was there. Well, let's just look at the greatest document ever composed, and I'm speaking about the Bible. And before I go to the Bible, I might mention this also. It's interesting to notice, for those who have studied anything about communism, that communism has always recognized that America's greatest weakness is its diverse cultures and diverse peoples, racial groups. They have always said that. Anybody who cares to read anything about communist material will recognize that they saw in America the fissures in the foundation, and those fissures where they wanted to drive the wedge has always been about diverse races. And that's what they've done. They've driven the wedge. And the wedge is exactly what we have in this article in Psychology Today talking about, that is, we need diversity as far as races are concerned, diverse backgrounds with homosexuality involved. So the point simply is that that's exactly what communism, that is diversity of the kind that they want to speak about, these liberals, the diversity that the communists wanted has always been about this kind of diversity where there's diverse races, and that will be a dividing point. It's not the strength of America unless we can bring it together. So let's just go, for example, to the Bible. The greatest document ever composed, but this is, of course, by inspired men, God-inspiring individuals. You might just think about Jesus selecting his apostles. He had 12 apostles. There's a multiplicity of witnesses. That's diversity because there's more than one person. That's the diversity that the Old Testament talks about, where in a multitude of counselors there is wisdom. That is, when the 12 apostles go off by themselves without our Lord's personal presence, then we would have to have a multiplicity of witnesses. But wait a minute, they're all Jews, they're all men, they're all Middle Eastern men. There are no white men, there are no black men, there are no Indian men, there are no Chinese men, there are no Far Eastern people. They're all men. So let's just say, for example, that there's a painting of the 12 apostles, as there are paintings of the 12 apostles, and one of these tour guides in Constitution Hall will go take the school children by the painting that we have, for example, of the Last Supper. And what would he point out? Now, the kids might point out, well, there's Christ in the middle, and there's John next to him. That must be Peter over here, and try to identify the apostles if they have that much information regarding the Bible from the public school system, which I highly doubt. But be that as it may, can you hear the tour guide now say, hey, what you want to notice, children, is they're all white men. Let's go to the next one. Now, what would that do? What is that designed to do? It's designed to criticize that which they composed, the New Testament itself. It's designed as an undercut of the Bible itself. How about the authors of the Bible? Not simply the 12 apostles, but let's take in the scope of the Old Testament as well as the New. What do we notice about those authors? About the writers of the Bible, inspired of God as they were? Well, there are no women, unless we have Ruth and Esther, but there are no women. They're all men. Is the Bible therefore racist and bigoted? In the words of Paul, God forbid. Were there any homosexuals that were authors of the Bible? To ask the question really curdles the blood, because it's nothing to do with that at all. And yet that's what our current mantra and our current doctrinaire teaches, and that is we have to have homosexuality and homosexuals involved in some kind of thinking processes because they bring different life experiences to these things. That is absolutely blasphemous to think about it regarding the authorship of the Bible. How about transgenders? Same thing there. But let's turn attention to the leadership in the churches. There are a couple of passages in the New Testament that teach that the leaders of churches are elders, and they're also called, by the way, they're called pastors. In the New Testament, in Acts chapter 20, elders are called pastors. And in the New Testament, now this is something that is this rankles denominationalism. There's no such thing as a one-man pastor system. There is no overseeing of one congregation by one individual pastor. That was unheard of in the Bible. It shows how far we've wandered in our Bible reading, in our Bible study, from what the Bible actually says, and accepted what denominationalism teaches. The Bible shows us that over each congregation there were appointed elders, plural, such as in Acts 14:23. And the qualifications for these in Titus 1, 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul gives them very plainly. And you'll notice one thing about it, they were all men. So the leadership, because the Bible tells us, obey them that have the rule over us, Hebrews 13 and 17, the leadership under which the congregation served were all men, no women involved at all. And furthermore, there were no young men, because the qualifications of an elder involved that he had to have a child or children that believe. That is, believe old enough to be believing children. Pretty uniform, isn't it? There's no diversity there. Now, there is diversity in the sense of multiplicity, because over each congregation in the New Testament model is a multiplicity, at least more than one elder overseeing a congregation. But diversity in the sense of various races and genders, absolutely not. There's no mantra. There's no mandate for that at all. How about down in Africa, when we go down to Africa and see congregations that are there, congregations of the church, and overseen by elders, and they have black elders. They're black men over black congregations. Well, is there something wrong with that? No, absolutely not. Well, there's a lack of diversity in the sense of the diversity that is being taught today. You see, the Bible shows us that in the multiplicity of counselors there is wisdom, so also in multiplicity of elders. But that has nothing to do with the diversity that is taught today in America. So diversity is our strength? Well, it just depends upon what you're talking about, doesn't it? How about, let's go to another topic, and that is, how about speakers in public churches? If we're going to look at what the Bible actually teaches regarding leadership and public speaking, what does the Bible say regarding public speakers in an assembly? 1 Corinthians chapter 14 shows us that the word church is used there in the sense of assembly. Listen carefully to what the inspired Paul tells us. He tells us his words are the word of the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 39. But here he tells us, let the women keep silent in the churches. It is not permitted unto them to speak, but let them be in subjection, as also saith the law. Women were to be silent in the churches. That is, as far as public speaking and teaching was concerned. They were not to exercise dominion over or have authority over the man. That's also in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Well, there's no diversity there. That is not in the sense that it is used today. There's only diversity in the sense that there's more than one speaker, but not in the sense of, well, we have to have more than one gender represented, more than one race represented, more than one orientation represented. No, not at all. The whole concept of diversity, as is taught by the neo-Marxists today, which tells us that we have to have representatives from blacks, Hispanics, women, homosexuals, is absolutely a communist concept that absolutely divides the nation, because it simply curries favor with different groups and puts people in different groups. And that's what Joe Biden said when he put the last person on the Supreme Court and said, we need the Supreme Court to look like America. Why? Why does it have to look like America? It is a confession. It is a confession that we have already divided up our nation into different groups, and we're all about groupthink instead of individual rights. And what does the Constitution teach? No, diversity is not our strength, not in the sense that it is used today. Let's think about diversity a little bit more here. And I'm thinking about the state of California. There's an article in Fox News, on the Fox News website the other day, that absolutely is shocking to say the least. And the article begins this way: California, the bellwether of the absurd, is about to do it again. The same legislature that rejected legislation to add human trafficking of a minor for purposes of commercial sex act to the state's list of serious felonies until public outrage prompted reconsideration, has now seen the supermajority Democrats pass a bill out of the assembly that mandates consideration of race in criminal sentencing. The article goes on to say the California State Assembly voted Assembly Bill 852 out of the chamber on a vote of 58 to 13 in May, with all aye votes coming from Democrats. AB 852 grows out of a Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom's reparations task force. Now, the bill requires California's criminal courts to consider the disparate impact on historically disenfranchised and system-impacted populations when issuing a sentence. Now, there's a related article on Fox News, and it informs us that that bill would add a section to the penal code. Now, get this: requiring courts to rectify alleged bias against blacks in the criminal justice system and take into account how historically persecuted minorities are affected differently than others. In other words, quit punishing blacks for crime, or quit giving them the full sentence because historically they have been discriminated against. Now let's just first of all break this down and think about it for just a moment. It's amazing that the Democrats that control the state of California with a supermajority did not want, matter of fact, they had resisted for 15 to 20 years the Republican efforts to enhance penalties against child sex trafficking in the state of California. The Democrats resisted that. They didn't want that done. So child sex trafficking is slavery. So they don't mind that kind of slavery at all. And yet, because of past slavery of blacks, they say that they want to lessen the penalties, and because of the past injustices to blacks, they want to lessen the penalties against blacks. So what does that all equal up? How does that all boil down? They're not interested in slavery at all. They're not interested at all in slavery. That's not the issue, because if they were interested in slavery and putting a stop to slavery or punishing people for slavery, they would have been interested in doing it regarding child sex trafficking in California, but this they didn't want to do. So it shows the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party. What they're really about is simply to divide the nation along neo-Marxist lines of blacks versus white. That's what's happening here. So let's think about this for a few moments. Heather McDonald is a great conservative thinker, a great conservative writer. She writes in a 2016 book called War Against Cops. Now remember, she started the book with, and you might remember the story, of course, just a few years ago, who could forget it actually, and that is Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri, and Michael Brown killed by the police officer. And so then the courts found that nothing was done wrong because Michael Brown was trying to kill the man. So he shot him and killed Michael Brown. Michael Brown, remember, had been seen as a thug robbing a store just a few moments before, and then the cops were called. And so I think his name was Darren Wilson. The cop came up, and then Michael Brown tried to kill the cop, Darren Wilson. But the courts found, of course, that that was justified in killing because Michael Brown was trying to kill him. And then, but the Obama administration, who was in power at the time, they didn't want that to let it go. They wanted to get in there, and anything that might create some kind of racial problem or racial strife, they wanted to stir it up. So they rushed into Ferguson, Missouri with the Justice Department led by Eric Holder, and they did stir everything up and talked about quotas and arrest and quotas and giving tickets and how many blacks that are on the police force and et cetera, et cetera. That's because Barack Obama is a neo-Marxist, and he wants to divide the country along black and white lines. They want you to think only in those categories, and that's the point. They want you to think only in the categories of black and white. So let's just use this as an illustration. Let's say myself, as a white man, if I committed a crime, let's say that the court say, well, you need to be punished more than the law mandates for the particular crime that you've committed because, after all, white people in the past have been given lighter sentences. So we're going to confess by that statement. We are automatically confessing. We are leaving the concept of individual rights and we're assessing groups and not individuals. We're thinking about groups. We're not assessing individuals. We have left the concept of individual rights that the Bible teaches, enshrined in our own Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. No, we're leaving all of that. We're saying, no, individuals don't have rights at all. We're talking about groups now because white people have been given privileges, and therefore Bill Lockwood, having committed this particular crime of jaywalking, he's going to be incarcerated for so many years because, after all, white people have been given a bye in the past. Does that even sound like justice? No, but that's exactly what's going on in California in reverse order. Let's use this illustration, just another one. Let's say Joe Biden committed a crime. Boy, did he commit a crime? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? It looks like it. It looks like he's committed one of the great capers of all of political history, but let's say that he's found guilty. He's committed a crime. Should we punish him more harshly than the law allows? Well, you know that's not going on. How about Hunter Biden? Should we punish him more harshly? Because, after all, they're white people, and white people have been given benefits of the doubt and given lesser and lighter sentences in the past, and therefore we're not going to punish them as much. What we're saying is we want a two-tiered system. Now, we know that there is a two-tiered system. Conservatives have always supposed that there was, and that is, one, for conservatives, look at what they're trying to do to Donald Trump. And number two, for liberals. But now we're saying, in California, they're saying, yes, we want a two-tiered system. One for whites and one for blacks. Isn't that amazing? That's absolutely remarkable. Where has the reasoning gone? Is there any reasoning, rational thinking, debating with people like this? They're all about stirring up racial strife based on black and white. No, they say we want a two-tiered system. It's kind of interesting also to note that dominated by black Democrats in California, many people said, well, the blacks need their own territory. This is the kind of justice, so-called, that they want to have. One for blacks and one for whites. Doesn't sound right, does it? No, it vitiates against everything that is common sense and reasoning. Let's think about justice itself for just a couple of more moments. Besides the alarming fact that California now officially boasts of its corruptness, making a two-tiered system a model, one for blacks and one for whites, dividing everything up along racial lines, just as the communists have always wanted to do, and that's exactly what they are doing. But let's just go back to the concept of justice as is taught in the Bible for a few moments. The Bible shows that the civil courts in the Old Testament, Israel, were to show no partiality or favoritism to the rich or the poor. That's Exodus chapter 23, verse 3. The civil code judges no partiality to rich or to poor. Sometimes judges would, for example, out of pity, favor the poor person. At other times, judicial decisions were tilted in favor of the wealthy person. You know that the latter would probably take place more readily than the other, but sometimes a judge might have more pity, more favor to a poor person, thinking, well, poor people in Israel have not been treated fairly. They're on the bottom rung of the economic ladder. Therefore, we're going to skew the decision in behalf of or in favor of the poor person. All such skewed decisions were anathema. God said, no, absolutely not. This is forbidden. The entire section of Exodus 22 and 23 deals with various laws of the civil code, including judgments passed down in a civil court by civic judges. And so we're told, for example, chapter 22, verse 28, you shall not revile the judges, nor curse a ruler of your people. That is because judges or magistrates must do their duty, and they ought not to suffer the threat of violence from evil men. That's chapter 22, verse 28. I threw that in for good measure because that's exactly what our system or our culture now has thrown out the window, because when conservative judges such as Clarence Thomas made decisions from the bench, and their decisions were in the majority that, for example, put back to the states laws pertaining to abortion, what happened? Well, all the liberals got angry and upset. They protested. They came out and threatened the judges at their houses. Here's what the Bible says: you shall not revile judges nor curse a ruler of your people. That is because, as the text shows us, they are in the position of God in a sense. They're even called gods. Psalms 82 and verse 6, judges are called gods, only in the sense that they stand in the position of God-given authority. So, down to Exodus chapter 23 and 3, neither shall you favor the poor man in his cause. So we've left all of that in California. It's repeated, that is Exodus 23 and 3, in Leviticus 19 and 15. It spells it out more clearly. Listen to this. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Why is that? Because the Bible teaches individual rights. California, rejecting the Bible, rejecting God-given rights, rejecting individual rights and individual responsibility, want to continue to divide this nation along black and white, and divide this nation along neo-Marxist lines. And that's exactly what's taking place. So judges and the Bible and all officials in authority are warned to give verdicts and judgment without partiality. Justice perverted is no justice at all. And that's exactly what's taking place right now in the state of California. Look out. It's coming your way. I want to put a short personal note in here, and that is, of course, that this podcast is shown on, and you can find it on Amazon Music, the Amazon Music app. You can find it there. You can also find us on Spotify. Spotify, Amazon Music are the two apps that you can find it. Some of the shorter clips are found on YouTube as well. You can find us there. Now also, I have a website called American Liberty with Bill Lockwood. By the way, the podcast is Patriotic Pulpit. That's how you find the podcast. But the website is American Liberty with Bill Lockwood. If you want to assist, aid us in production of the program, there is a donate button on that particular website, American Liberty with Bill Lockwood. Happy to have you donate if you will. If you don't want to, that's fine too. Now also, I want to make this public announcement that coming up next weekend, that would be August 11 and 12, I'm having a religious debate with a defender of realized eschatology. What is realized eschatology, you might say? Well, realized eschatology is the view, some people call it hyper-realized eschatology, but it is the view that all end-time things, eschatology, occurred at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So that Christ came the final and second time at AD 70. People entered into heaven and hell at AD 70. So right now you're either in heaven or you're in hell. All that took place at AD 70. The judgment of the world occurred right there. All of it is funneled into a basic concept of, well, that's referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. And so the opponent that I'm having is Holger Neubauer, a preacher in the state of Michigan, who has adopted this blatantly false doctrine of realized eschatology. So the debate will be held at the Iowa Park Church of Christ building, Iowa Park, Texas. That's right outside of Wichita Falls. And it will be found on Bible Studies with Bill Lockwood. You can find it uploaded there after the debate. So we will also stream it. You can look at it live if you wish to see that. So there's how you find what I do. That's how you find different materials that I produce. Also, I would like to point out that the sermons that I preach every week in the pulpit of the Iowa Park Church of Christ, they're also found on Bible Studies with Bill Lockwood. You can go there to find them.